Thanks for listening to the future of Reformed Apologetics. More episodes are on the way, but in the meantime, I wanted to share this unaired clip of Scott talking about Machen and Van Til's friendship. While J. Gresham Machen doesn't figure into the book, The Future of Reformed Apologetics, Scott had some great stories and deep insight into their relationship that was just too good to leave on a hard drive somewhere. I hope you enjoyed this bonus episode of The Future of Reformed Apologetics. Yeah, and you mentioned Machen there, and his relationship with Van Til. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Machen and Van Til and maybe how Machen viewed Van Til, but also how Van Til viewed Machen.
Yeah, Machen was Van Til's hero, humanly speaking. He was the man who not only had confidence in him at Princeton Seminary and asked him to teach. Machen taught apologetics, but when he saw Van Til's gifts, he said, "Can you do this?" And Van Til did. And even after Machen left, Van Til was asked to teach apologetics again, and he got advice from Machen, probably not going to help you because this place is already down the drain. So Van Til didn't do that. But I think that vote of confidence from somebody like Machen, it's amazing to me how Machen seemed like such a quirky guy in so many ways. You know, Van Til would tell me about him and his dog. He would take his dog onto campus, and talk about a righteous man loves his beast. He'd do this scripture quote, and he'd actually walk around sometimes and he would just be muttering, "Poor Doss, poor Doss." His nickname was Doss. So, what kind of guy is this? And yet, he's single, never married. So, you've got all these things going on. And yet he had such an appeal and charisma and backbone and strength to do what he did in the face of this neo-Orthodox liberalism encroaching on Princeton. Van Til was just bowled over by Machen's personality. And, he told me he saw Machen write a check. Machen had the means to do this so that the seminary could keep going for a year because it was the Great Depression when things started here in 1929. And he was just amazed at the strength of Machen. Everybody was against him. It looked like Machen against the world. And so this little fledgling thing starts down on Pine Street. Machen's able to get the people he wanted. Van Til said twice he wasn't coming until Machen eyeballed him like Farel to Calvin and said, "This is the Lord's will for you." And Van Til he respected the man so much, he had to do it. So the interesting aspect of all of this, I think, is Machen's untimely death. Machen didn't have that much time at Westminster, from 29 to 37. That's not a lot of time, and in that period of time, there were controversies. Welcome to Presbyterianism. McCrae and others were upset. There's evidence that O.T. Alice was a bit upset about a thing or two. So there's all this taking place. Francis Schaeffer, was here for 2 years and went with McCrae and others to start Faith. All of that's going on. The faculty's small, the student body's small. They're having to navigate, negotiate, all those things. And then lo and behold, in January 37, Machen dies. When Machen dies, Van Til becomes the de facto leader of the institution. I think probably because Van Til did have a strong personality. I knew him only into his later years when he was in his 80s, and it was still a strong but kindly personality. But I could envision a man 50 years prior, sort of pounding his fists on the table, saying, "We have to stand firm here. Machen's gone, but we cannot give in. Or if we give in, it's back to Princeton." I mean, even in those days, 37, where are you going to go? You go back to Princeton. It's only been 8 years. So all of that in Van Til's mind caused him, in God's providence, to be the kind of de facto leader of the institution. Westminster didn't have a president until, I think, 58 or something like that. So In those days, it was faculty run. Very wise move, in my view. And so Van Til was the one to sort of take this on and keep the faculty together, and he was respected in that way. Not everyone agreed with everyone always on faculty, but this is a bit of an overstatement. It was sort of like we need to find out what Van Til thinks before we move this direction or that direction. And I think part of that was because of his love for Machen and his understanding of what he Machen wanted to do with this institute. Van Til saw himself as paying a debt to Machen as he tried to lead the institution from 1937 forward.
And what would you say to the kinds of people who would say that they love Machen but don't appreciate Van Til?
Well, I can see how that could be possible. Machen's writings and professional interests were not directly related to apologetics. On the other hand, Greg Bahnsen wrote that piece way back for a celebration, OPC celebration, and it was in the 80s, I believe, maybe late 80s. Was Machen a presuppositionalist? It's kind of been the question. And the question's anachronistic because the word wasn't around in Machen's time as a label. I'm sort of grieving that it ever became a label. But I understand the question. The question really is, to what extent was Machen on board with Van Til? Van Til worried about this a bit in his first years. And when he went home, after his first year of teaching, he went home for the summer, home meaning back to, went west to, I think, Michigan, maybe Indiana. But he was in that area preparing for his next courses that he had to teach. He's a new professor. It's a job. And he was going to teach his evidences course. That's what he entitled, Evidences. And he was nervous what Machen would think because he recognized if he's going to teach that course, he's going to be in opposition to some of his revered teachers, as he called them, at Princeton. So he wrote Machen and said, I'm not sure about this. I'm not going to be able to carry on Princeton's tradition of common sense realism the way Van Til got it from William Brenton Green Jr. And Machen writes back and says, I'm sure you'll do a good job. I wish I could be in that course. Wish I could sit in on it. So I think that the point here is Machen was fully aware of what Van Til was up to. He hired him, asked him 3 times, hired him because he knew Van Til had a unique ability to take what he'd learned from Calvin and Kuyper and Bavinck and Princeton, merge all that together in order to refine and clarify what a reformed apologetic ought to look like. Machen knew that. So I could see how someone would say, well, from what I read in Machen, there's not the Van Tilian emphasis. That's right, because it was early. We're still in the 30s here. But in Machen's mind, he knew, and when Machen knew he wanted Van Til. And he got him, and he was thrilled that he had him. And I think that's why it was such a crushing blow when Machen died to Van Til and to the rest of the faculty, and why he and they were committed to carrying on Machen's vision.
Yeah. There's I was recently read the Stonehouse biography of Machen, and there's this little quip in there. It's almost a throwaway line where he's talking about Buswell and how Buswell put out this big critique of Westminster, most of it surrounding his criticisms of Van Til. And Stonehouse says that Machen was planning to write a full response to Buswell, but he died before he was able to produce that. So kind of a tragedy that we didn't get him to be on paper saying this is how it is. But
yeah, such a tragedy. Yeah, and there'll be an essay in the book. There's an essay in the book from Dave Filson, who wrote just a tremendous PhD dissertation, which I hope someday we'll be able to publish on Buswell and Van Til. It's just very clarifying, useful. I won't say it's probably as good as what Machen would have written, but I think it has to be close to what Machen would have written with all the hindsight now. Buswell was the one who invented the term presuppositionalism, and it was sort of a pejorative term, and then it just got stuck onto Van Til. So that's a most unfortunate historical event. But, Buswell called Van Til a pantheist. Imagine that. being a Van Tilian, getting called a pantheist. That happens sometimes. And it just shows the absurdity of the way Buswell was formulating what Van Til was. It was just kind of another false straw man narrative that went on and on and on. And Van Til, I remember talking to him about it, he was so frustrated with his interactions with Buswell because you can read Filson on this, so this may be too strong a statement, but Buswell really wasn't a consistent Calvinist. So if you're not that, your apologetics is just going to be different. It's going to be different if you don't have the sort of reformed foundations and roots that you need in order to develop that. I would love to have seen what Machen would have said. I think it would have clarified kind of where he was relative to Van Til. It would have been all Van Til and no Buswell.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Future of Reformed Apologetics. Join us next week when we discuss Brian Mattson's essay, Van Til's Apologetic, Attributes, Roots, and Fruits. If you're interested in learning more about the book this show was based on, visit WTSpress.com to order a copy of The Future of Reformed Apologetics, featuring essays by K. Scott Oliphant, Christopher Watkin, Brian G. Mattson, Daniel Strange, James Anderson, Rob Edwards, David O. Filson, Nathan D. Shannon, and Vern Poitras, and published by Westminster Seminary Press. This episode was hosted by Brandon McLean Smith. It was produced by Brandon McLean Smith, Josh Curry, and Jimmy Atkins. Special thanks to Paul Quirum, Jonathan Brack, and Josiah Pettit. This podcast is a production of Westminster Media. If you enjoyed today's episode, please visit wts.edu/give to find out how you can support broadcasts and publications like this one as a part of Westminster's mission to train specialists in the Bible for the future of Christ's Church. Thank you for listening.